Today, I'll be processing a dataset using CryoSPARC Live, a real-time cryo-EM single particle analysis software system built by Structura Biotechnology that allows for rapid processing of raw microscope data to high-resolution structures. This software is designed to be used in real time with data collection at your microscope, on data that is being uploaded to you from a facility, or on data you've already collected as a streamlined first-cut workflow. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'll use a dataset that has already been collected. You can find the dataset I'm going to use on Empire under entry 10,288. This GPCR was collected using a Thermo Fisher Scientific Titan Krios and a Gatan K2 Summit direct electron camera. The dataset is about 500 gigabytes with almost 2,800 movies with 40 frames each. The links to the dataset are in the description below. Before we begin, please ensure that you've installed CryoSPARC, which, as of version 3.0, includes CryoSPARC Live by default. Links are in the description for more information on how to install CryoSPARC and access the live interface. The first thing we need to do is create a new project. Usually, when you start collecting data, it's wise to create a new project to virtually and physically separate your data. Doing so makes it easier down the line to not only find things, but to easily share and offload data cleanly, as you can only export a live session by sharing the entire project along with it. So first, I'm going to make a project in the main CryoSPARC interface, using the title of the data we're processing. Once I've created my project, I can then navigate over to the CryoSPARC Live interface, where I'll be creating our live session. As you can see, you'll be greeted with the CryoSPARC Live Browse Sessions interface, where all past and current sessions are displayed. You can filter the sessions you see using the projects on the left, or the drop-down menus at the top. Towards the right, you can see all the statistics created by each session. A summary of the statistics is available on each session card, including direct links to the jobs used for reconstruction, which you can open up and inspect without leaving the page. You can also access the Manage Data tool from this page, which can be used to view and delete individual data types from each of the sessions in your instance. Finally, you can access a live session by clicking on the blue arrow, or create a new one by hitting the New button. For this tutorial, I'll create a new session and I'll select the project I just created. I'll then give it a name, and usually this name would be something biologically relevant about the current sample in the microscope, but for this example, I'll keep it simple. Now, I can hit Create Session, which will take me to the session view. You can create your live session at any point during your data collection run, but the earlier the better, as the plots and statistics created during the session will serve as helpful feedback when determining the quality of your data collection and sample. I'm going to quickly switch back to the main CryoSPARC interface to show you what the project looks like now that the session is created. You'll see that inside our project, we have a workspace, but unlike other workspaces in CryoSPARC, this one is labeled with a session number in blue and the title we created. You can then go inside the workspace and navigate the jobs as you usually would. I'll share more about this later in the tutorial. Now, back to CryoSPARC Live, where I'll quickly walk you through the interface. For this, I'll use a CryoSPARC Live session that has already been completed. First, starting at the top left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the CryoSPARC logo, with their instance's name right under it. You can click this button to view the main menu and use it to go back to the Browse Sessions page, view keyboard shortcuts, look at the logs from the server, and more. Moving right, we can see the session and project name, as well as its status. Clicking this button allows us to start or clear the session and reset exposure states. Clearing the session is similar to clearing a job in CryoSPARC. This will delete all data created by the session, but keep any parameters you have already set, which is helpful when you've made a mistake and want to restart the session from scratch. This should be rare, as CryoSPARC Live has an intelligent reprocessing feature, which I'll cover in more detail later on. To the right of that, we have a shortcut to start the live session. Moving to the left side of the interface, we have the sidebar, which includes key statistics about the session. These statistics update in real time when you're processing data. If the session was running, you'll get a rolling window average of how fast your movies are being preprocessed. This sidebar is also how you navigate between the different tabs available in the session. You can even go directly to the jobs being used for 2D classification or refinement and view their stream logs without leaving the page. I'll cover the nuances of each statistic as we start processing. Quickly flipping through the tabs, the Details tab is where you can see high-level information about your session. You have a section here for note-taking, which also supports checklists and rich formatting. The Configuration tab is where you'll set this session's parameters, which you can change at any time. The Individual Exposure tab allows you to inspect a single exposure's diagnostic plots. If this session was running, these plots will update as new ones are available, which is helpful when you're trying to decide whether the grid currently being imaged is any good. To the right, we have the Exposure Viewer, which will be anchored to this location in the next 4 tabs. You can view the pick locations, change the low-pass filter, zoom into the micrograph, and even add manual picks to be used for the template picker. In the Overview tab, we can threshold our data using several key attributes. You can do this at any time, and any exposures and the resulting particles that are rejected here will not be used in streaming 2D classification or refinement. The Browse tab gives us a fully customizable scatter plot for which we can choose the X and Y axes. Similar to plots in the Overview tab, we can click on a point to go to that specific exposure. We can also export this table as a CSV file for reporting. The Picking tab allows us to dial in our exact picking parameters. We can view our changes in real time and confirm if we want them to apply for future exposures or all exposures. We can switch to different pickers using the buttons at the top of the tab. When you start a new live session, the Blob Picker is activated by default. You want to use those blob picks to generate templates for the template picker, which you could do easily here. I'll cover the 2D classification, abInitio, and refinement tabs later on once we start processing and are actually at the point where we can start the reconstruction phase of our live session. Let's set up our session now. In the Configuration tab, we can use this checklist to start filling in the required values. For the compute resources, I'm going to select the same lane for each of these lanes, since I have 4 GPUs on the workstation in this lane, and I know no one else is using them right now by looking at the resources table. I can then fill in where CryoSPARC should find all the movies, as well as the gain reference. I'll set the wildcard to only pick up the TIFF files, as I have files other than the movies in this folder. I don't need to change anything else here, so I can hit Enable and move on to the Parameters section. For the last few parameters we want to change, we'll need to enable the Advanced Parameters toggle. We'll set the Fourier crop box size to 240 pixels, which means our pixel size increases by about 25% to 1.15 angstrom, setting our Nyquist resolution to about 2.3 angstrom, which should be more than enough. Doing this allows us to save time during processing and also reduce the amount of space taken up by our extracted particles. Now, we can hit Apply to All and start our session, which will queue up the CryoSPARC Live workers. Note that I could have done all this in one shot by applying our configuration profile. I can always save my current configuration as a profile if I ever need to use it in the future. As exposures are processed, we can see the exposure feed being populated with thumbnails created by the workers. Exposures being processed are indicated with a flashing blue outline and a blue progress indicator labeled with the current processing stage. You can see now, the sidebar is being populated with live statistics, including how many exposures were found per hour. I'm seeing over 9,000 since my movies already exist, but if you were doing this live, you'll most likely see the throughput of your imaging stack. You can follow the latest exposure or navigate to a specific one using the Exposure Navigation tool. Exposures are processed in the order they are found. The live worker will execute patch motion correction, which corrects global and local motion, patch CTF estimation, particle picking, which by default is the Blob Picker, and finally particle extraction, all in one shot per movie. Now that I've processed exposures, I can start excluding poor quality images from further stages of processing. The first way I can do this is by manually rejecting an exposure. Rejected exposures show up in the feed with an orange outline and an orange icon. The next thing I can do is use any of the plots from the Overview tab. I can either use the sliders or change my cursor to select thresholds to drag a box around the exposures I want to accept. I can clear this threshold at any time, and the particles from these exposures will be added back to the pool of available exposures for reconstruction. When I set a threshold, you'll see the attribute and the thresholds themselves in the sidebar. The main reason I haven't started the reconstruction phase of this session is because I first want to activate the template picker. As you can see, I've already got great results from the Blob Picker, but I can get them to be even better by classifying them and using their averages as templates for the template picker. If I already had templates I wanted to use, I can load them directly here. Once I hit Generate Templates, a 2D classification job will kick off, and I can see its progress here until it's done. Once the 2D classification job is ready, I can select as many templates as I want, then set a particle diameter. If I wasn't sure how these parameters would affect my picks, I can hit Test Adjustments to start the template picker on this exposure only. I'm going to hit Activate for all to get the workers to redo picking on the exposures it's already processed with these new parameters. New exposures will use these new parameters automatically. This is an example of CryoSPARC Live's reprocessing feature. You can change any parameter, whether it be picking parameters or even CTF estimation parameters, and CryoSPARC Live will automatically reprocess only what it needs to on exposures it's already processed. For example, in this case, since we only changed picking parameters, we don't need to redo motion correction or CTF estimation. The workers will pick up each exposure and know exactly what stage of processing to do without user intervention. Now that we have particles coming in from the template picker, we can refine our extraction thresholds by using the normalized cross-correlation and power scores to exclude any bad particle picks. The histogram is a great way to see where most of the particles exist. Once we start moving the sliders, we can see pick locations updating in the exposure viewer. You can check out how these parameters look on multiple exposures before you confirm them. Once confirmed, particles falling within the new thresholds and not too close to the edges will be re-extracted. Note that if you expanded the thresholds, the CryoSPARC Live worker will only extract particles it hasn't already extracted. It will never make more than one copy of the same particle. Since we decrease the thresholds, no new particles need to be written to the disk. You can start streaming 2D classification at any time once you have started the session. You can start 2D classification early on into a session to see more about the visual quality of the particles extracted thus far, and make choices about tuning picking parameters or about the sample itself. When I say streaming, I mean that 2D classification is performed seamlessly, updating in real time when a session is in progress. Newly available particles can be classified into existing classes as they're extracted by the workers. You can choose to directly start a streaming 2D classification here with default parameters, or you can build one with custom parameters using the main CryoSPARC interface. You'll be able to see the progress of your streaming 2D classification job here, and as soon as class averages are ready, you'll be able to select them here. Once the streaming 2D classification job finishes the first 20 iterations to create baseline averages, it will go into waiting status, which means it's looking for any new particles to classify that have already been extracted by the workers since it started running. At any time, I can choose to force this job to restart. Or, if I ever pause this session, I can pick up where I left off by clicking Attempt Resume. The classes here will automatically update as new particles get classified, so I'll select all the good classes and move on to abInitio to create an initial reference model for refinement. I can either load a volume that I already have as my initial reference model, or I can start a new abInitio reconstruction job from the particles out of the classes I selected in the Streaming 2D Classification tab. Note that if you use multiple classes at this stage, you can select one as the initial model for streaming 3D refinement, but all particles will be used for refinement regardless of the class they are from. You also have the option of building your own abInitio reconstruction job with custom parameters by hitting the hammer icon. Once abInitio starts running and is outputting volumes, you'll be able to view and interact with them in the 3D volume viewer. A volume will be written to the disk every 100 iterations, so you'll be able to see the progression of your model in real time. Once the abInitio reconstruction job has finished, you'll be able to start the streaming 3D refinement job, which will also refine the abInitio volume with new particles as they're classified by the streaming 2D classification job. Here, you can manipulate the volume to inspect it by zooming or panning and setting the threshold of the map. You can also download the map directly. Set your symmetry and hit Start. Similar to the other tabs, you can build your own streaming 3D refinement job with custom parameters using the main CryoSPARC interface by clicking on the hammer icon. Streaming 3D refinement will update the 3D map, FSC resolution estimate, and diagnostic plots repeatedly as new images are collected. When sufficient new particles are available that pass the previous filtering stages and 2D class selection, refinement will backtrack to a lower resolution map and re-perform refinement of all particles until convergence. The rate of updating will depend on the number of particles already collected and the current resolution. Similar to streaming 2D classification, while waiting for new particles, the streaming 3D refinement job will enter waiting status. At this point, you can walk away from your workstation. As new images are collected by your imaging stack, they will be pre-processed, 2D classified, and finally refined in 3D constantly. You can always use the Overview tab and the 2D classification averages to filter out any unwanted exposures or particles respectively. Once I'm done processing, I can pause the session, which will retain all session parameters and all results. Any running pre-processing workers will be allowed to finish their current exposure and then gracefully exit. Any running 2D or 3D streaming jobs will be killed and marked as completed so that their latest results become available to use for further processing in CryoSPARC, or resuming in CryoSPARC Live. You can restart the session at any time, and pre-processing will continue where it left off, and you can opt to restart or resume reconstruction jobs. If you have finished with the session and do not plan to return to it, you may wish to mark it as completed from the Details panel. This will set the session to a completed status and separate it from running and pause sessions in the Browse Sessions page. A completed session can still be started again and no results are lost. At any time, I can take the results that have been created by CryoSPARC Live and further process them in the main CryoSPARC interface. For example, for this dataset, since it's a membrane protein, it'll benefit from non-uniform refinement. I can export the particles from this session and move back into the main CryoSPARC interface to build a new non-uniform refinement job with these particles. I can also navigate into the CryoSPARC project where the live session is housed itself and use the outputs from streaming 2D classification or streaming refinement directly for further processing. Doing so gets me to a higher resolution result. This brings us to the end of a live processing session. For more information about CryoSPARC Live and what you can use it for, visit our guide where we have in-depth documentation, case studies, and more videos.